The heavy iron gates of the town square groaned as they were flung open, but the sound was drowned out by the roar of the crowd. Elena Sterling felt the first stone graze her shoulder, but she didn't flinch. She was used to the weight of their hatred. For 7 years she had been the witch of Blackthorne, the woman blamed for every failed harvest, every sudden illness and the mysterious fire that had claimed the town's beloved chapel. They called her a curse, they called her a murderer. She stood on the wooden platform, her hands bound by rough hemp rope, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The town council had finally decided that exile wasn't enough. Today they intended to strip her of the last thing she owned, her dignity. Silence. The command didn't come from the magistrate. It came from a voice like rolling thunder, cutting through the vitriol of the mob. The crowd parted like the Red Sea as a black carriage, bearing the crest of a silver wolf, rolled into the square. Out stepped Julian Hunt, the Duke of Blackthorne. He was a man of cold steel and terrifying rumors, a war hero who had returned from the borders with a heart made of ice and a reputation for ruthlessness that rivaled the crown itself. He climbed the platform, his heavy boots echoing against the wood. He didn't look at the magistrate. He didn't look at the screaming townspeople. He looked directly at Elena, his piercing gray eyes searching hers with an intensity that made her breath hitch. "My Lord Duke," the magistrate stammered, bowing low. "We are just finishing the sentencing for this blight upon our town." Julian didn't blink. He reached out, his gloved hand catching Elena's chin, forcing her to look at him. "You intend to exile her? To throw her to the wolves of the forest? It is the will of the people, Grace. She is a curse," someone screamed from the front row. Julian turned his head slightly, his gaze chilling the speaker into silence. "Then I suppose it is fortunate that I have a fondness for curses." He turned back to the magistrate, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous hum. "Release her. I am here to announce my betrothal." The square went deathly silent. "The dukedom requires a duchess," Julian continued, his voice carrying to the very back of the square. "And I have chosen mine. I, Julian Hunt, will marry Elena Sterling." A collective gasp ripped through the crowd. The most powerful man in the kingdom was choosing the most hated woman in the world. But as Julian leaned in close to whisper in Elena's ear, she saw something no one else did. A flicker of recognition and a desperate ancient hunger. "I haven't forgotten the girl in the cave, Elena," he whispered. "And I haven't forgotten the mark on your shoulder. They think they're punishing a witch, but they're actually trying to kill a queen. Why would a duke risk his crown for a woman the world wants dead? What happened in that cave all those years ago? Hello to all of you watching. I am so thrilled to have you here for this journey of mystery and high-stakes romance. Before we uncover the Duke's hidden motive, tell me, where are you watching from today? Are you cozy at home or on a break? I love hearing about your day. If you're as hooked on this mystery as I am, please hit that subscribe button and join our community. Your support means everything, and you won't want to miss the secrets we're about to uncover." Elena looked at the crowd, then back at the man who had just bought her life. She realized then that her nightmare wasn't ending. It was just changing shape. But as Julian's hand moved to cover the hidden mark beneath her sleeve, she had to ask herself, is he saving me from the fire, or is he the one who started it? The carriage ride to Blackthorne Manor was a suffocating descent into silence. Elena sat as far from the Duke as the velvet cushions would allow, her fingers tracing the rough edges of her mother's silver locket, the only thing the town hadn't managed to steal from her. She lived in a world where her deepest desire was simple: to be seen. Not as a monster, not as a curse, but as the girl she was before the Great Fever took her family and the town turned her into a scapegoat. She feared the dark not because of what was in it, but because the dark was the only place she was safe from the eyes of others. "You're shaking," Julian said, his voice devoid of the theatrical power he'd used in the square. "I'm waiting for the price to be named, my lord," Elena replied, her voice a fragile blade. "No man, especially one of your standing, buys a witch out of charity. What do you want from me?" Julian leaned forward, the shadows of the passing forest dancing across his sharp features. "I want you to survive long enough to fulfill a promise you don't even remember making." At the manor, Elena was introduced to the few who remained loyal to the Duke. Among them was Caleb Thorne, the Duke's master of arms. Caleb was a man of scars and few words, a soldier who looked at Elena not with hatred, but with a wary, professional curiosity. He had seen the Duke go through hell on the front lines, and he knew Julian Hunt didn't do anything without a tactical reason. "She's the one?" Caleb asked, his hand resting on the hilt of his broadsword. "She is," Julian replied. "Keep the perimeter tight. The town council won't let her go easily. They've spent 7 years building a lie around her name. They won't let the truth walk through these gates." As the days passed, Elena discovered that the Duke was a man of hidden depths and hidden sorrows. He spent his nights in a library filled with ancient, forbidden texts, searching for something he wouldn't name. He was a man driven by a singular motivation: debt. 10 years ago, a young Julian had been left for dead in the caves of the Blackthorne cliffs after a hunting accident that was actually an assassination attempt. A young girl had found him, dragged him to safety, and used an ancient, intuitive knowledge to heal a wound that should have been fatal. Elena caught a glimpse of his bare shoulder one evening as he worked in the library. There, etched into his skin, was a faint, shimmering scar that pulsed with a low light, the same light that lived beneath the birthmark on Elena's own shoulder. The relationship between them was a tense dance of suspicion and growing intrigue. Elena began to realize that the town's hatred wasn't accidental. The rumors had been planted and watered by the town's elite, specifically by Eleanor Wick, the magistrate's wife, who had been systematically seizing Elena's family lands under the guise of cleansing the cursed soil. "I have to ask you, have you ever felt like you were the villain in someone else's story just because you had something they wanted? The way this town has treated Elena is heartbreaking, but seeing Julian stand between her and the world, is there anything more powerful than that? Tell me in the comments, do you believe in fate, or is Julian just using her for the prophecy? And if you're rooting for the outcast, make sure you've subscribed so you can see how she claims her power back." One night, Elena found Julian standing on the balcony, looking out over the misty moors. "Why did you really come for me?" she asked softly. Julian turned, his eyes reflecting the silver of the moon. "Because the mark you carry, Elena, it's not a curse. It's a key. The kingdom is failing. The crops are dying because the old magic is being bled dry by men like the magistrate. You are the only one who can anchor it back. And if I refuse? Then we both burn," Julian said, stepping closer until she could feel the heat radiating from him. "But I'd rather burn with you than watch them extinguish you from a distance." The foundation was set. They were two broken pieces of a forgotten puzzle, held together by a duke's secret and a woman's resilience. But the inciting incident was lurking in the shadows, ready to force Elena to choose between the town that hated her and the man she wasn't sure she could trust. The fragile peace of the manor was shattered on the third night. Elena was in the conservatory, her fingers brushing against a dying moonflower, when the air suddenly grew heavy, thick with the smell of ozone and wet earth. The flower under her touch didn't just wither. It turned to black ash instantly. "Elena, get back from the glass." Julian's voice barked from the doorway an instant before the high-arched windows exploded inward. A group of masked riders, clad in the deep crimson of the town guard but carrying no official banners, vaulted into the room. These weren't just angry villagers. These were trained mercenaries. Julian moved with a lethal feline grace, his blade singing as it left its scabbard. He intercepted the lead attacker, the clash of steel ringing through the halls. "Caleb, secure the east wing. They've breached the perimeter." In the chaos, Elena felt a cold hand wrap around her throat. She was spun around to face a man with eyes like flint, Marcus Vane, the captain of the guard and the magistrate's right hand. "The Duke can't save you from the prophecy," Vane hissed, his blade pressing against the skin of her shoulder, right over the hidden mark. "If we can't hang you in the square, we'll bleed you in the dirt. Your life is the price for the kingdom's purity." As the blade nicked her skin, the mark on Elena's shoulder flared with a blinding violet light. The shock wave threw Vane across the room, his armor clattering against the marble floor. Elena fell to her knees, her vision swimming with ancient images. A crown of thorns, a throne of salt, and a young boy crying in a cave. Julian was at her side in a heartbeat, his sword dripping with the blood of the mercenaries he'd dispatched. He didn't look at the carnage, he looked at the glowing mark on her skin. His expression wasn't one of fear, but of a terrifying, grim realization. "It started," he whispered, his hand hovering over her wound. "What have you done to me?" Elena gasped, her breath coming in ragged hitches. "Why is this happening?" The blood spilled tonight was the catalyst, Julian said, his eyes meeting hers. He reached down and pulled her up, his grip bruisingly tight. They didn't come to kill you, Elena. They came to trigger the mark. The magistrate knows that if the mark awakens while you're filled with fear, it will consume the Blackthorne lands. He wants the curse to be real so he can justify your execution and seize the Duke's title for himself. The first major plot twist had landed. The hatred wasn't just about land or jealousy. It was a calculated ritual. The town hadn't been suffering because of Elena. They had been poisoned by the magistrate to make her look like the cause. The decision was thrust upon her. Elena looked at the dying mercenaries, then at Julian. She could run into the night and hide, or she could step into the fire Julian had prepared for her. I'm not a witch, Elena said, her voice finally finding its steel. But if they want a curse, I'll show them what a real one looks like. That's the spirit, Julian murmured, a dark, dangerous smile touching his lips. He turned to the window, where the lights of the town were beginning to gather like a sea of angry fireflies. Caleb, prepare the horses. We aren't hiding in this manner anymore. We're going to the source. Before we see where the Duke is taking her, I have to ask you, have you ever realized that the person everyone was pointing at was actually the only one trying to save the building from burning? The magistrate's plan is pure evil. Do you think Elena should save the town that tried to kill her, or let the mark destroy them all? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you're ready for the rising tension, make sure you're subscribed. As they galloped out of the gates, the mark on Elena's shoulder continued to hum, a low rhythmic throb that felt like a second heartbeat. The hunt was no longer just about survival. It was a race against a prophecy that was already beginning to breathe. The horses thundered through the Blackthorne woods, their breath coming in silver plumes against the moonlight. Behind them, the orange glow of the town's torches flickered through the trees like the eyes of a hungry beast. Julian led them not toward the main road, but higher into the jagged cliffs, the very place where the prophecy was born. We can't stop, Julian shouted over the wind. The mark is a beacon. As long as it's active, the magistrate's mages can track your every heartbeat. They took refuge in an ancient, vine-choked ruin perched on the edge of a precipice. Inside, the walls were covered in faded murals that seemed to shiver as Elena passed. Her connection with Julian was deepening through the mark. She could feel his pulse, his hidden anxiety, and a growing, fierce protectiveness that felt like a physical weight. Rest, Julian commanded, handing her a water skin. Caleb and I will hold the pass. But rest was impossible. As the night deepened, the romantic tension between them reached a breaking point. Elena found Julian sharpening his blade by a small, hidden fire. You knew this would happen, she said, her voice a soft echo in the stone chamber. You didn't just marry me to save me. You married me because you needed the key to the source. Julian stopped his whetstone. He didn't look up, but his jaw tightened. I needed to save the kingdom, yes. But I also needed to see if the girl who saved me was still there, under all that armor of bitterness the town forced you to wear. He finally met her eyes. I've spent 10 years searching for you, Elena. Not for a key. For you. The moment was interrupted by a low, guttural howl that wasn't human. They've released the hounds, Caleb hissed, appearing at the entrance. Magistrate Wick isn't playing by the rules of men anymore. He's used the stolen magic to summon the shadow stalkers. The hounds were creatures of smoke and bone, red-eyed nightmares that could ignore physical barriers. As the first one lunged from the shadows, Elena felt the mark on her shoulder burn with an icy cold. Julian, look out. She didn't think, she simply threw her hand forward. A burst of violet energy erupted from her palm, striking the creature midair and dissolving it into ash. But the effort drained her and she collapsed into Julian's arms. It's taking too much from you, he whispered, his face inches from hers. The more you use it to defend yourself, the more it claims your life force. Then we have to end this quickly, she panted. They spent the following hours navigating the treacherous mountain paths, planting false trails for the hounds. Elena began to see clues in the environment, flowers blooming in the snow, birds following their path, that suggested the curse was actually nature trying to heal itself through her. But the mystery deepened when they found a message carved into a waypoint stone. The Duke is the sacrifice. Elena's heart plummeted. Was Julian's protection a lie? Was he leading her to a ritual where he would have to die to activate her power? The seeds of doubt planted by years of betrayal began to sprout once more. I have to ask you all, have you ever wanted to trust someone so badly but the world keeps giving you reasons to doubt them? Is Julian a hero or a martyr? And what is the magistrate really after? Leave a comment with trust or doubt, and let's see which side you're on. Also, make sure you've subscribed. The midpoint revelation is going to flip everything you think you know on its head. Julian, Elena said as they reached the mouth of the great cave. Is there something about the prophecy you haven't told me? Something about the price. Julian looked at the cave, then back at her, his expression unreadable. The price is high, Elena. But it's a price I'm willing to pay. The tension was no longer just about the monsters behind them. It was about the secrets between them. And as they stepped into the darkness of the source, the truth was waiting to be unmasked. The air inside the source was thick with the scent of ancient stone and something sweet, like blooming jasmine in the middle of winter. The walls weren't made of mere rock. They were translucent, glowing with veins of pulsing violet light that matched the mark on Elena's shoulder. They reached the center of the cavern, a vast cathedral of crystal where a single pool of black water sat perfectly still. This is it, Julian whispered, his voice echoing. The heart of the Blackthorne lineage. Elena walked toward the water, drawn by a magnetic pull she couldn't resist. But as she looked into the reflection, she didn't see herself. She saw a woman with her eyes, dressed in the robes of the high priestess, standing beside the first Duke of Blackthorne. Julian, look, she breathed. But Julian wasn't looking at the water. He was looking at the shadows behind her. I see you've found the nursery, Your Grace, a voice sneered. From the darkness stepped Magistrate Wick, but he was transformed. His eyes were milky white and his skin was covered in the same violet veins as the cavern, but theirs were blackened like rot. Beside him stood a woman Elena recognized from the town's highest circles. Lady Eleanor, her face twisted in a look of ecstatic madness. You're late for the coronation, Eleanor laughed. The coronation of what? Elena demanded, her mark burning with a sudden violent heat. Not you, child, the magistrate said, stepping into the light of the crystals. The Duke. You see, the prophecy was never about a witch saving a kingdom. It was about a vessel. The mark you carry isn't yours, Elena. It was stolen from the Blackthorne bloodline centuries ago and hidden in your family's lineage to protect it from being used by the corrupt. Julian stepped forward, his hand on his sword. Enough, Wick. The game is over. Oh, it's just beginning, Wick countered. Tell her, Julian. Tell her why you really searched for her for 10 years. Tell her what happens when the mark is returned to its rightful owner. Elena turned to Julian, her heart hammering. Julian, what is he talking about? Julian didn't look at her. His silhouette was rigid, his gray eyes fixed on the magistrate. The mark is a reservoir of power, Elena. If it stays in a human host who hasn't been prepared, it eventually consumes them. The only way to stop it is to transfer it back to a direct descendant of the first Duke. To me. The revelation hit Elena like a physical blow. So you didn't marry me to save me. You married me to harvest me. No, Julian said, finally turning to her, his expression a mask of agony. I married you to stop them from doing it. If they perform the transfer, they don't just take the power, they take your life. If I do it, I can share the burden. I can take the rot into myself and let you live. He's lying. Eleanor shrieked. He wants the power for himself. He wants to be the God King of the Moors. Everything Elena believed was challenged. Was Julian her protector or just a more sophisticated thief than the magistrate? Was the passion they had shared just a way to make the vessel more compliant? The stakes reached their absolute peak. The cavern began to rumble, the crystals vibrating with a frequency that made Elena's teeth ache. The magistrate raised a jagged obsidian dagger, and the shadows in the room began to coalesce into a terrifying, spectral form. The ancient spirit of the first Duke, awakened and hungry. The mark belongs to the crown. Wick roared. And tonight the crown is mine. The room exploded in a clash of magic and steel. Julian lunged at the magistrate, but he was intercepted by a wall of dark energy. Elena stood in the center, the mark on her shoulder glowing so brightly it began to sear her skin. She was the prize in a war between two men, and she realized with a sickening clarity that in either scenario herself was the first thing to be sacrificed. I have to ask you, who can she trust? Is Julian's sharing the burden a noble sacrifice or a clever lie to gain ultimate power? The betrayal feels so close no matter which way she turns. What would you do if you found out your entire identity was just a battery for someone else's legacy? Drop a comment with Elena alone if you think she should keep the power for herself. And subscribe now. The darkest hour is about to fall. Elena, run! Julian shouted, his blade shattering against the magistrate's shield. But she didn't run. She looked at the black water of the pool, then at the mark on her arm. If she was a vessel, she decided she was going to be one that no one could pour from. The cavern groaned as the very foundations of the mountain began to fracture. Elena's scream was lost in the roar of collapsing crystal. The magistrate's dark magic slammed into Julian, throwing him against the jagged walls. He slumped to the ground, his sword clattering into the black pool, his eyes fluttering shut. Julian! Elena cried out, but as she moved toward him, Lady Eleanor intercepted her, pinning her arms back with a strength fueled by madness. "Don't worry about the Duke, dear," Eleanor hissed in her ear. "He'll be dead soon enough and you'll be a hollow shell, a perfect battery for my husband's new world." Magistrate Wick approached, the obsidian dagger pulsing with a sickly light. He didn't just want the mark, he began the ritual of extraction. As he traced a symbol in the air, Elena felt a sensation of her soul being pulled through a needle's eye. The violet light began to leak from her skin, flowing toward the magistrate's outstretched hand. The separation was agonizing. Every memory of her mother, every moment of resilience she had built over 7 years of solitude, felt like it was being erased. She was being unmade. "Look at her," Wick mocked, his voice echoing in the chamber. "The great Witch of Blackthorne, reduced to nothing but a flickering candle. The town was right to hate you, Elena. You were never a person to them. You were just a problem to be solved." The obstacles were insurmountable. Julian lay motionless, potentially dead. Caleb was trapped behind a wall of shadowhounds outside the inner sanctum. And Elena was losing the very essence of who she was. The situation appeared utterly hopeless. She felt the cold touch of the obsidian blade against her shoulder, ready to carve the mark out of her flesh. In that moment of absolute despair, she looked at Julian's unconscious form one last time. She saw the scar on his shoulder, the one she had given him as a child, pulsing in a weak, dying rhythm. He had told her he'd spent 10 years searching for her. She realized then that even if he had wanted the power, he had never once tried to take it by force. He had married her in front of the whole world, making himself a target just to keep her close. The separation from him, the thought of him dying in this cold, dark place while she became a puppet for the magistrate, was the final straw. But as the magistrate plunged the dagger toward the mark, the cavern didn't go dark. It went white. Before we see if Elena can survive this final violation, I have to ask you, have you ever felt like you were at your absolute breaking point, only to find a hidden reservoir of strength you didn't know existed? Elena is at the edge of the abyss. Does she have enough left in her to fight back, or is the Witch of Blackthorne about to become a memory? Tell me your thoughts in the comments. And please subscribe now. The turning point is the only thing left between them and total destruction. Elena's eyes snapped open, but they weren't brown anymore. They were glowing with a fierce, blinding violet. She felt the magistrate's dagger shatter against her skin. "You forgot one thing, magistrate," she whispered, her voice vibrating with the power of the mountain itself. "A vessel can choose to overflow." The white light receding from Elena's skin didn't leave her cold. It left her electrified. The magistrate stumbled back, his hands scorched by the very energy he had tried to siphon. "Impossible," Wick gasped, clutching his ruined palms. "The ritual was perfect. You are a commoner. You cannot command the source." "I am not commanding it," Elena said, her voice resonant and calm as she rose from the ground. "I am finally listening to it." She realized in this moment of clarity that the curse the town feared was merely the source reacting to the magistrate's corruption. The land wasn't dying because of her. It was crying out through her. She reached out her hand not toward the magistrate, but toward the black pool where Julian's sword lay submerged. As if answering a call, the water began to churn. The silver blade rose from the depths, wreathed in violet flames, and flew into Elena's hand. The cold weight of the steel felt right, a physical anchor for the metaphysical storm raging within her. "Julian," she whispered. She knelt beside the fallen duke. The mark on her shoulder wasn't just a battery, it was a bridge. She pressed her glowing hand against the scar on his shoulder. Instead of taking his life, she pushed her own vitality into him, a desperate gamble of love and sacrifice. Julian's eyes snapped open. The gray irises were now flecked with gold, reflecting the ancient power Elena was funneling into him. He didn't look at her with greed or suspicion. He looked at her with awe. "Elena," he rasped, his hand covering hers. You did it. You bonded with the heart." "We did it," she corrected. The turning point wasn't just Elena finding her strength. It was the realization that the prophecy required two halves of a whole, the blood of the protector and the soul of the guardian. Together they stood up, the light between them forming a shield that the magistrate's shadowhounds couldn't penetrate. Outside, the rumbling grew louder as the mountain began to heal itself. The dark veins in the walls were being flushed out by the pure violet light. "Caleb, break the line," Julian roared, his voice amplified by the cavern's magic. Caleb Thorne burst into the inner sanctum, his armor battered but his eyes burning with determination. He carried the ancient banner of the Silver Wolf, which began to glow in the presence of the reunited pair. "The magistrate's men are retreating," Caleb shouted. "The townspeople, they've reached the mouth of the cave. They saw the light, my lord. They're confused, they're frightened, but they're watching." "Let them watch," Elena said, stepping toward the magistrate and Lady Eleanor, who were shrinking into the corners of the chamber. "Let them see the difference between a curse and a consequence. I have to ask you, is there anything more satisfying than the moment the victim realizes they are actually the most powerful person in the room? Elena and Julian are finally united, and the truth is about to be revealed to the entire town. Do you think the townspeople deserve to be saved after how they treated Elena? Drop a yes or a no in the comments. And make sure you're subscribed. The final confrontation is about to settle all debts. Julian took Elena's hand, their marks pulsing in perfect unison. "It's time to show them the truth, Elena. It's time to end the lies of Blackthorne." They turned toward the exit, the light trailing behind them like a royal mantle. The final push wasn't just a battle of swords. It was a battle for the soul of the kingdom. The mouth of the great cave opened like a giant's maw, revealing the valley below. The scene was a nightmare of fire and shadow. Thousands of townspeople stood at the base of the cliffs, their torches flickering with a sickly greenish hue, a sign that Magistrate Wick's corruption had spread even to the common flames. As Elena and Julian stepped onto the jagged stone overlook, the crowd let out a collective shriek of terror. They didn't see a duke and his bride. They saw two figures wreathed in the violet fire of the witch's curse. "There she is." Magistrate Wick's voice boomed from behind them. He had escaped the inner sanctum through a hidden passage and now stood on a higher ledge, his arms raised to the sky. "The witch has corrupted the duke. She has stolen the light of Blackthorne to burn your homes. Kill them both and the curse will end." The mob, fueled by 7 years of carefully planted lies and the magistrate's mind-warping magic, surged forward. They began to climb the rocks, their faces twisted in a frenzy of hatred. "Julian, we can't hurt them," Elena whispered, her heart breaking at the sight of the people she had once called neighbors. "They don't know what they're doing." "Then we don't fight the people," Julian said, his eyes fixed on Wick. "We fight the source of the lie." The climax erupted in a two-front battle. While Caleb Thorne and a small group of loyal knights formed a non-lethal shield at the cave's entrance to hold back the possessed mob, Elena and Julian turned their combined power toward the magistrate. Wick unleashed a torrent of shadow fire, a jagged spear of darkness aimed directly at Elena's heart. Julian didn't jump in front of her, he stood with her. They raised their joined hands and the violet light formed a shimmering aegis that didn't just block the shadow, it absorbed it. "You wanted the mark, Wick?" Elena's voice echoed across the valley, amplified by the mountain. "Then take the truth that comes with it." She pushed forward, and the memories of the last 7 years, the cold nights, the stones thrown in the square, the loneliness, flowed through the mark and into the atmosphere. The violet light didn't burn, it revealed. As the light washed over the townspeople, the greenish tint on their torches vanished. The magistrate's hold on their minds shattered. They stopped climbing, their weapons falling from their hands as they felt the raw, unedited truth of Elena's life. They saw the magistrate stealing the lands. They saw Lady Eleanor poisoning the wells. They saw the Duke's silent protection. No! Wick screamed, his body beginning to crack as the stolen magic he had consumed turned against him. It's mine. The power is mine. In a final, desperate act, Wick lunged at Elena with the obsidian dagger. But as the blade struck the violet shield, the ancient spirit of the source, the spirit Wick had tried to enslave, manifested as a giant silver wolf. With a roar that shook the very stars, the spirit lunged. The magistrate was consumed by his own darkness, his form dissolving into a cloud of black ash that was swept away by a sudden cleansing wind. Lady Eleanor, seeing her husband's end, fell to her knees, her mind finally breaking under the weight of her own cruelty. The silence that followed was absolute. Elena stood on the ledge, her chest heaving, the violet glow slowly fading into a soft, steady hum. She looked down at the townspeople. They were no longer a mob, they were just people, tired, frightened, and deeply ashamed. The most surprising twist happened then. Instead of a cheer of victory, the entire town, thousands of souls, sank to their knees. Not in fear of a witch, but in a silent, collective plea for forgiveness. I have to ask you, can you imagine the weight of that moment? After 7 years of being the most hated person in town, to have them all finally see the truth at the same time? It's a triumph that goes beyond any battle. Do you think Elena should forgive them, or is the damage too deep? Drop a forgive or rebuild in the comments. And make sure you're subscribed for the final conclusion. The resolution to the prophecy is the most emotional part of all. Julian turned to Elena, his hand still firmly in hers. He didn't look at the crowd, he only had eyes for her. He reached out and gently tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear. The prophecy is fulfilled, Elena, he whispered. The kingdom is protected. But more importantly, you're free. The spring that followed the night at the source was the most vibrant the kingdom had seen in a century. The moors, once gray and brittle, were now a carpet of heather and wild lavender. The curse had not just been lifted. It had been transformed into a blessing that flowed through every stream and fueled every harvest. Elena stood in the courtyard of Blackthorne Manor, no longer dressed in the rags of an outcast or the heavy silk of a sacrificial bride. She wore a simple, elegant gown of forest green, her hair flowing free. The mark on her shoulder had faded into a faint silvery tracing, a permanent reminder of the power she held, but one that no longer burned with the cold of isolation. The town of Blackthorne was changing too. The walls of the magistrate's former estate had been torn down, replaced by a public infirmary and a school where Elena herself taught the history of the land, the true history. The people who had once thrown stones now brought offerings of fresh bread and wildflowers to the manor gates. The transition wasn't perfect. Forgiveness is a slow-growing vine, but the silence of hatred had been replaced by the hum of reconstruction. Caleb Thorne stood by the gates, supervising a group of young knights. He caught Elena's eye and offered a respectful nod. He was no longer just a protector of a secret. He was the commander of a guard dedicated to the peace Elena and Julian had forged. A penny for your thoughts, my Duchess? Elena turned to see Julian leaning against a stone pillar. The gold flecks in his eyes caught the sunlight, a lingering gift from their bond at the source. He looked younger, the weight of a decade-long search finally lifted from his shoulders. I was just thinking about the cave, Elena said, stepping into his arms. And how a terrified little girl and a dying boy changed the world without even knowing it. They didn't change the world, Julian whispered, pulling her close. They just gave the world a chance to fix itself. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a ring, not of gold or diamonds, but of polished blackthorn crystal, glowing with a soft internal violet light. We were married in a square of hatred and a cave of shadows. I'd like to ask you again in the light of day. Will you stay by my side, Elena? Not as a vessel and not as a prophecy, but as my wife. Elena looked at the ring, then at the man who had seen her soul when everyone else saw a monster. I've been your wife since the moment I dragged you into that cave, Julian. And I'm not going anywhere. The prophecy had said the mark would either protect the kingdom or destroy it. As the bells of the town began to ring, no longer a toll of alarm but a peal of celebration, it was clear which path had been chosen. The Duke and the Witch had become the heart of Blackthorne, a living testament to the fact that love, when anchored in truth, is the only magic that can truly save a world. I want to thank every single one of you for staying with us through this epic journey of shadows and light. Elena's story reminds us that even when the whole world is against you, your true value is something no one can take away. Before you go, I'd love to hear your final thoughts. What was the most shocking moment for you? Was it the ritual or the Duke's true motive? Drop your comments below. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe. We have so many more emotional, addictive stories to tell, and we want you right here with us for every twist and turn. Julian and Elena walked toward the manor doors together, their hands linked, their hearts at peace. The sun set behind the cliffs, casting a warm, protective glow over the land they had saved. The story of the hated woman and the cold Duke was over, but the legend of the Guardians of Blackthorne was only just beginning.